Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I can't see all of you, but we are so excited to have you here, even if it's just virtually. And thank you so much for tuning in to today's presentation. So before we begin, I would just like to take a moment and recognize our colonial context. So the UBC Vancouver campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and this includes the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So tonight, we have our last installment of the Tangent Lecture Series. For those of you joining us for the first time for this lecture series, the Tangent Lecture Series highlights a series of SALA alumni during different stages of their careers to discuss their experiences. And this evening, our session called Switching focuses on alumni that have branched out or switched into different professions than the one they earned their degree in. And we have three speakers lined up sharing their stories. We are starting with Zoe Florence tonight, and Zoe got her bachelor's in environmental design from SALA in 2008. She is currently the lead project manager of permanent galleries at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She previously was the assistant curator for the 2013 Urbanism Architecture by City by Biennale in Shenzhen, China. And Zoe, she has a Master of Architecture degree from Columbia University and is also a registered architect in New York State. So welcome, Zoe. Awesome to have you here. Next, after Zoe, we'll have Michael Heaney talking about his experience. He received his architecture degree in 1984, and he is currently with CNO Advisory. He is the past president and CEO of the Surrey City Development Corporation, a municipality-owned real estate development company. And prior to that, he managed Bing Tom Architects for 29 years, where he oversaw the company's growth into a leading international practice that we all are very familiar with. So welcome, Michael. Great to have you here too. And then lastly, we will end with Jamie Nichols. He got his landscape architecture degree in 2007, and he is the mayor of Hudson. Mayor of Hudson. And Jamie is an artist, he's a teacher, as well as a landscape architect. He added politician to his career trajectory in 2011, swept into Ottawa as a member of Canada's first Democratic Socialist official opposition. And Jamie was also a junior member of the leadership team serving in the transport, infrastructure, and communities portfolio. Since 2017, he has served as the mayor of Hudson, Quebec. So welcome, Jamie. Great to have you here tonight too. And with that, I think I will hand it off to Zoe.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here tonight. I thought that I would start by briefly walking you through some of the highlights of my career path to date. After graduating from the environmental design program, I really had my heart set on New York. And so I moved to the city, I think a couple of days before the 2008 recession. When I got here, I divided my time between interning at a small boutique architecture firm and nannying so that I could afford to live in the city. And after a couple of years, I decided to return to grad school and ended up at the Graduate School of Architecture at Columbia to pursue my MArch. And while I was there, I got a part-time job with the exhibitions department. And after spending a few years on the crew, helping to facilitate and install several shows like the one you see here at the campus gallery, during my final year of grad school, I supervised the crew. And I'd say this was really my first real exposure to exhibition design and project management, which I hadn't really thought of as a career path up until this point. And it was through this exposure that I started to think about additional possibilities in the field. Now, towards the end of grad school, I had the opportunity to work as the assistant curator for the Biennale in Shenzhen, where I helped manage the exhibition design of this humongous 40,000 square foot warehouse overseeing fabrication and installation on site. It was a really exciting project, and I gained a lot of valuable experience in terms of coordination and management of a lot of different international participants. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that this was all done during the evenings and weekends when I wasn't at my day job working as a junior designer at a high-end design build firm. So when that project wrapped up, I was put in touch with the new head of design at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And after about a year of discussion and interviewing and more interviewing, I was hired as an exhibition designer. I've been at the museum for over 7 years, which I really did not imagine when I first took the job, but I've really loved working at the Met, even with all of its challenges, very unique personalities, politics. There is something that I find so compelling about the scale of the place, the depth of the collection, and really the sheer number of visitors who get to experience our shows. Now, before joining the museum, I really didn't know much about in-house design studios at museums, so it was a whole new world to me. And I think that what is so unusual about the design studio at the Met is not only the size of it, I think there are around 30 people, plus or minus, but it also combines graphic designers, exhibition designers, lighting designers, production designers, and they're all in one space together, collaborating on many projects. The Met installs somewhere between 50 and 70 shows annually, and those range in scale and scope, from our largest special exhibitions gallery, which is around 14,000 square feet, to much more low-key rotations or reinstallations where a curator may want to swap out one object for another. So when I was an exhibition designer, I was working on between 5 and 10 shows at any one moment in time. And those would really be a mixed bag in terms of the size of the shows. And also they would be each at a different stage of development. So one might be just kicking off and working through concept design, and another might be wrapping up installation. And at around this time on the side, I also wrote my exams and got my architecture license, which was like another full-time job. I think at this point now I've designed over 50 exhibitions at the Met, but I thought it might be helpful if I walk you through a larger high-profile exhibition that I designed, and then to contrast that with a much smaller niche, almost hidden exhibition at the museum, and then talk about what I am doing now, which is a bit of a pivot. So I'll first briefly walk you through this large rectangular gallery, and then I'll show you something that's hidden way back in the museum. So in 2017, I worked on the Age of Empires exhibition at the museum, which featured, I think, more than 160 objects of ancient Chinese art. The works in this show included extremely rare ceramics, metalwork, textiles, sculpture, painting, and calligraphy, and a lot of architectural models. And those were on loan from over 30 museums and archaeological institutions in China. Now, I believe a majority of the works had never before been seen in the West, and it was their first time traveling to the West. So that was super exciting. And as the exhibition designer for this show, I spent over a year developing and then refining the floor plan, the casework, the finishing details, and worked very closely with curators, objects conservation, the registrar, all of our internal shops, fabricators, and installers. So these are just a couple of stills, either from the renders that I developed or actual installation shots. So this 14,000 square foot exhibition, which is in our largest gallery space, required extensive demo, a lot of new wall construction to accommodate the very specific display requirements of each object. Here you can see casework is embedded in these new thickened walls, sometimes piercing through to frame objects in the foreground and beyond. Now, that very same year, I collaborated with artists Myra and Alex Kalman on Sarah Berman's Closet, which was a temporary recreation of their relative's extremely well-organized closet. Berman's closet, which was originally from her small apartment in Greenwich Village, displays all of her lovingly and very precisely organized shoes, clothes, linens, beauty products, luggage, and other necessities. The closet was presented as kind of a small period room in dialogue with a recently reinstalled dressing room down the hall from 1882, which featured the clothing of Arabella Worsham, who was a wealthy art patron from Virginia. Despite the vast differences of scale and ornament, the two rooms show that there were similarities between the life stories of both of these personalities. As the exhibition designer on this show, I collaborated very closely with the artists and curator to realize their collective vision. The closet was embedded in a new temporary wall and really transformed the gallery into a domestic setting. Now, after working as an exhibition designer and then a senior exhibition designer, I spent the past 2 years as lead creative director for all exhibition design across the institution, managing both the exhibition design and lighting design teams, redlining all of their drawings, developing comprehensive accessibility standards for exhibition design all across the institution. And then in 2020, I was also the co-interim head of the design department, providing support during a very challenging year of COVID with furloughs, layoffs, protests, and the general upheaval of that year. Not surprisingly, that was a tough year. And working from home with a toddler and being pregnant with our second kid, there was a lot going on. And as much as I loved my job, I saw an opportunity to pivot in 2021. A new head of construction at the Met had recently reached out to me to recruit me for a position on his project management team. We discussed the role over many months, and in September, I finally crossed over to the dark side, to the construction department, where I oversee a portfolio of capital projects, including, as you see here, the renovation of the ancient Near Eastern galleries. This is the existing condition. This is not what we aspire to have it look like. The project right now is in its very early stages of development, so I can't really share too much on it yet. But in my new role, I'm no longer working on temporary exhibitions at the Met, and instead, I lead design direction and really represent the museum as a client, working with outside architects to create and realize permanent gallery reinstallations. This has certainly been a shift in my career, and it's also one that I'm really excited about. I still get to collaborate with large teams, but I'm also now dealing with budgets, scheduling, lots of procurement challenges, external consultants, and above all else, big architects with big ideas. Thank you.
Michael, are you ready?
There, can you hear me? Great. So I guess I'm the grayest hair person here, so it goes back a while. I graduated from UBC, I guess, as Thena said, in the mid-'80s. It was actually a really lousy time to graduate as an architect. I think interest rates were close to 20% back then. There really wasn't a lot of work in terms of commissions, but I was really fortunate that I got on with a brand new firm. Eva Matsuzaki, who some of you may know, and Jim Wright had just left Arthur's office to set up their own practice, and so there really wasn't any work, but so they couldn't afford much, but they could afford me. It was one of those things where we used to fight over making the coffee because it was the only thing to do in the office for the first little while, and then we started to get some commissions, mostly doing little house renovations for different, they had young kids who were all playing soccer. So the whole entire soccer team's houses were all renovated by our firm. And we did that for a while. And that was actually a great experience. And I must admit, there's a lot to be said for working for a small firm when you start out after school. Projects, just regardless of scale, there's an awful lot that's the same about them. So if you can do small projects that have this kind of quick metabolism, you'll get this experience across the board really quickly. And when you're starting out, that's incredibly valuable. So as often you do when you graduate, I bounced around a bit. So I worked for Eva and Jim for about a year, and then I went to work for Richard Henriquez. Gregory was still in school himself at that point, and I started to sort of scale up. It was leading up to Expo 86, and he had the Australian Pavilion for Expo 86, which was the reason I was hired. But I was also able to get into starting to do some the Sylvia Hotel tower was happening then, and I worked on that a bit. And I got a little job. I'd sort of got enough experience by then that I was able to have enough responsibility to run my own job. And I got a little renovation to a Jewish private school, Talmud Torah, which was sort of my first chance to sort of run a project. And that went really well until the firm ran out of work, and they laid everybody off. And so then I was very fortunate to get picked up by Jim Chang, and that was an interesting period for Jim's office, because he was really transitioning from doing mostly custom houses and sort of smaller scale, sort of 3-4 story stuff into the sort of the towers that people come to associate with them now. And that was a fantastic experience. But what I found was, I sort of managed to get registered. So it was great to kind of learn the craft and develop an understanding of sort of how projects come to be and how you execute them. But I found I was increasingly frustrated, particularly on the developer work at Jim's, it seemed to me that the sort of really important decisions weren't actually being made by the architect. That more often than not, the developers were making calls on things, and in my opinion, they didn't often have the right background or understanding to make those decisions. And so I realized if I wanted to have that kind of influence, I'd need to retool a little bit. So I started going to night school when I was at Jim's, and started the Urban Land program out at UBC, I think that's online now, but it's a great program. It was about 4 years of I think it was sort of 1 lecture a week, 1 assignment a week kind of thing. But it was really broadened my understanding of real estate and how architecture fits into that. And while I was in the middle of that program working with Jim, I met up with Bing Tom, and Bing had been working for Ericsson. He'd set up his office a few years in the early 80s, I guess, so sort of 83, something around that. He also, it was a terrible, terrible time to be working, but he managed to eke out an existence sort of doing work for family members. And then Expo 86 came along, and he managed to get I think 5 pavilions for Expo 86. And one of them, and this is really more his story than my story, but he was a big influence on me. And one of them was the Hong Kong Pavilion, which was a design competition, which he won. And when they came over to give him the commission, they said, and here's I think it was $7 million, and so now you can build it. And if you have any money left over, you can keep it. And if you go over budget, that's your problem. And the scheme was a really simple scheme. And so he saved most of that money, not most of it, but a significant portion of that money he was able to save. And so when Expo was over, he decided that this was an opportunity to become a developer architect. And so, and that was sort of, I joined him in the late 80s. And at that point, the vast majority of the firm was, of the work in the firm was stuff that we were doing on our own account. So we were seeing opportunities, finding them, putting together syndicates of investors. And this was just after Expo, so there was a lot of interest from Hong Kong and Vancouver, and Bing having been born in Hong Kong and with roots in Hong Kong, it was tremendous connections there. And so it was fantastic for me. So I was able to come in, take all the stuff that I'd learned with Jim and the others, and apply it, but also get involved in the financing and the marketing and all of that aspects of getting projects approved and built. And that was incredibly exciting. And we did, it doesn't seem like much money now, but sort of, this is over 30 years ago, $60 million of our own projects. And so I did that for probably 2 or 3 years. But during this time, we got our first sort of big break in terms of architectural commissions, and we got the commission to do the Canada Pavilion for Expo 92, so our first big international pavilion. And it ended up being the most popular pavilion of all of the international pavilions of Expo 92. There were like 4-hour lineups to get in the 45-degree heat. It was incredible that people would do that, and it was the only international pavilion that was kept as a legacy building from the fair. But from that, we started to get more interesting architectural commissions. And so the development side of the office, we actually took that money and we bought 400 acres in Kelowna. And that is a much slower market, and we rezoned it, and it was kind of like clipping coupons, but it gave the architectural side of the practice a lot of financial security. So we could take more risk on the architectural side because we had this kind of confidence. So we had this money coming from Kelowna to allow us to take a bit more risk with the architectural side, which was definitely the core interest. So from that, we got the Chan Center, which UBC folks will be familiar with, and that ended up being quite successful and led to other kind of performing arts center projects, and then really allowed the firm to go international. We did a big performing arts center in Washington, DC, and opened an office there. And more recently, we won the competition to do the new Opera House in Hong Kong and opened an office back then. But one of the other projects, which was hugely influential for me, and one that sort of used this kind of broader skills that I'd been developing, was one called Central City in Surrey. And that was for those of you that may not be overly familiar with Surrey, but Surrey for many years has been trying to set up a city center in North Surrey, in Whalley, and where the sort of central SkyTrain station was. And they'd been having a hard time making that happen. And we were able to, because of the sort of breadth of skills of the office, we were able to bring together a really interesting consortia of primarily public sector, but also some private sector interests, to create a very large project called Central City, about 1 million square feet. And it was a combination of a new university and an office building. And I led that project. It was a big piece of my life for about four years. And I really did love it. And it was incredibly successful, very complex politically, and in other ways as well. But we managed to pull it off. And it has had a profound effect on how Surrey City Centre developed. And one of the things that came out of that was there's a whole sort of very progressive political regime that moved into Surrey around that time. And one of the things they did was they set up a municipal development corporation called the Surrey City Development Corporation. And it was established by a very progressive mayor by the name of Diane Watson, who kind of brought Surrey into the 21st century. And she had a program called Build Surrey. So she was really trying to build much more infrastructure, libraries, rec centers, that kind of thing. But she realized that there were sort of other things that needed to be done that the public sector really weren't ideally set up to do that, and that there may be an opportunity to generate some money for the city, and that's what she created this company called SCDC, Surrey City Centre Development Corporation. And so it's kind of like a crown corporation in the sense that it operates at arm's length from the city. The company has to operate as if it's a business. They report to a private board of directors. And the mandate is twofold. One is it's a for-profit company, so they can't lose money, but they have to generate a dividend for the city, and they have to support themselves. And then the second thing was they had to do projects which would advance the city in a positive way. So it's kind of working in this world which is kind of not quite private sector, not quite public sector, but it's going after projects which taking a little bit more risk than the private sector might ordinarily do, but that was all right with the board because they had this dual mandate of actually making this city move forward. So I took over the presidency of that about a little over 4 years ago, and it was incredibly exciting. It had been operating for a while, but the company had kind of got diverted a bit, and so it was a chance to step in, develop a new strategic plan for the company, and really kind of get it on track. So we refocused the company really to focus in two areas. One is the city center, which was very close to my heart with the Central City project, but the other was to really focus on building the kind of economic base of the city by focusing a lot on industrial land, which was something that I had no experience with. I mostly was doing these sort of high-end cultural projects with things, but it actually ended up being really interesting because there's a huge crisis of industrial land shortage in the region. But what I discovered fairly quickly is that everyone's complaining there's no industrial land, but they're still building the same industrial buildings that they've been building for the last 150 years. So I was interested in finding ways of using industrial land in a more intense way. And we did an intriguing project with Walmart, where we got them to build a distribution center, but instead of building a sort of 600,000 square foot warehouse, we did one which was about half that size, but it was 90 feet high and full of robots and cranes and stuff. And so it was all highly mechanized. And so that had a sort of, so it used land in a much more intensive way than traditionally. And it also hired a lot of graduates from the SFU mechatronics program, which is located in Surrey. So it's kind of this double win. So those are the kinds of projects that we were working on. And so we were generating about $4.5 million dividend to the city every year, and we built up a portfolio of about $250 million. And then there was an election, and one thing you'll notice if you're in is architecture. Architecture and politics cannot be. You have to live with politics if you're going to be an architect. There's no way around it. It's a political act, architecture, and so I had my Waterloo, I guess, in that the new mayor, who had been really his nemesis was Diane Watts, who created our company. He was dead set to close us down, which he succeeded in doing. So I ended up merging the company into the city at the end of last year, which was very sad for me, and I think unfortunate for the city. He's had to raise taxes now because he's lost the dividend, but he felt that it wasn't the right thing for the city. But it may, who knows, one day perhaps it'll come back. So the last few months I've been trying to do my own pivot, trying to figure out what's next, so I've been doing some freelance consulting through this company, CNO Advisory, which sort of stands for cities and organizations, trying to help them. And I've been doing, a lot of it has been really helping people put together design teams for projects. And I've really been enjoying that a lot. But that's kind of, in a nutshell, kind of where I'm at now.
Oh, Jamie, I think you're still muted.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Michael. That was fascinating. And full disclosure for everyone here, we had an election last week, and actually, so the switching title of this seminar is apt because I lost the election. So I'm no longer the mayor of Hudson, but this is the reality of political life. There probably will be other projects that died on the drawing board, Michael, like with the political switch, that is a common thing. And if there's anyone out there at SALA that there's a job opening, just give me a call, just joking. And it's always good to set a time limit for politicians of 10 minutes, because if you give them an open floor, they might talk your ear off for about half an hour. So I guess a lot of people wonder and ask me the question, how did you make the jump from wanting to be a landscape architect to being a politician in elected office? And it's been about 10 years that I've served in public office. First 4 years was in federal, and then 4 years as mayor of my hometown of Hudson, Quebec. And in the middle there, I served as a consultant with municipalities. But the way that I view it was that it wasn't really a switch. It was an evolution that grew out of something that happened very early to me in life. Basically, I grew up in the town that I represented, Hudson, Quebec. And we didn't actually have a public library in our town. We had a private library that had a bunch of boring books for a very curious mind. And my political awakening happened when I was about 19 years old. I was at Malaspina College, which is now known as Vancouver Island University. And I found this book by an author called Murray Bookchin that was called Post-Scarcity Anarchism. And I was just, fascinated with all the books that I could find at that time. And Bookchin started writing in the 60s. And I just want to share the passage that really changed my view of the world, coming from this small town, going to Vancouver Island, and then realizing what was actually happening in the world. It said, no less alarming is the fact that we must drastically revise our traditional notions of what constitutes an environmental pollutant. A few decades ago, it would have been absurd to describe carbon dioxide and heat as pollutants in the customary sense of the term. Yet both may rank among the most serious sources of future ecological imbalance and may pose major threats to the viability of the planet. As a result of the industrial and domestic combustion activities, the quantity of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased by roughly 25% in the past 100 years and may well double by the end of the century. The famous greenhouse effect, which the increasing quantity of the gas is expected to produce, has been widely discussed in the media. Eventually, it is supposed, the gas will inhibit the dissipation of the world's heat into space, causing a rise in overall temperatures, which will melt the polar ice caps and result in the inundation of vast coastal areas. Thermal pollution, the result mainly of warm water discharged by nuclear and conventional power plants, has had disastrous effects on the ecology of lakes, rivers, and estuaries. Increases in water temperature not only damage the physiological and reproductive activities of the fish, they also promote the great blooms of algae that have become such formidable problems in the waterways. Bookchin wrote this in 1966, and I read it in 1990, and basically my brain went, and I thought, if what he is saying is true, we're screwed. And from the week that we've seen in British Columbia, we know that the people, that we have a big challenge in front of us. And my search at that time became, how can I contribute to bettering the world? It was one of the things after a short period of nihilism in my 20s, where I practiced art and then got dissatisfied with that because I thought, I'm not really offering anything to the world here. I'm satisfying myself, but I need to offer something to the world. I taught for many years, and then I had a light bulb that said, perhaps landscape architecture could be the answer to this ecological challenge that we're facing. And I entered the program in 2003, the master's program, and it really stimulated my mind. And I quickly fell under the supervision of Professor Susan Harrington, who was doing research at that time on children's environments. And we did a research project called Outside Criteria, where we observed 16 childcare centers in Vancouver. We did video observation over 6 hours in each one. And the findings from that research were that natural elements in these synthetic environments were important to children's development. And all of a sudden I saw sort of a window opening where I could contribute. I could be a voice that advocates for healthy environments for children, because knowing the environment that we're in now and the way that cities have built up, perhaps if we give this empathy for nature to children, that we'll be in a better spot. But what I found through that research was that there was a powerful lobby that was working to homogenize children's environments. It was the playground lobby. And Susan and I did a paper in critical social policy. We were threatened with a lawsuit by the Canadian Standards Association, which the dean of the department had to defend us from, and did so successfully. We only had to retract one element of our story of the Toronto community playground teardown, where throughout the 90s, Toronto dismantled community-built playgrounds in favor of CSA-approved corporate playgrounds. What I did during that project was I did policy forensics. So I went to Hansard and I looked at Hansard and what was happening at the time in Ontario, in the Ontario legislature. And what I found was that the lobby was actually influencing the politicians and leaders in the Ontario legislature to pass the CSA standards as the design policy for playgrounds. Fast forward to graduating, I actually worked for a firm that designed playgrounds and found that the lobby was very intimate, that it was the companies themselves that every spring they would take us out for lunch. They would talk about their new products. And then throughout the season, we would call on them for specs for different playgrounds. I quickly saw that this was really something, an uphill struggle, and that policy itself would have to change. I entered McGill's doctorate program in urban planning in 2010. But during that time, at the same time I entered that program, I was asked by organizers in the New Democratic Party to run as a candidate in 2011. And I thought, hey, what the heck? You know, I'll be able to speak to my values. I'll, you know, be able to speak 30 days about the vision that this party has for the country, which I found most matched my values. And I thought it was going to be 30 days and then I would go back to my doctorate. But lo and behold, something called the Orange Wave happened, where I got elected to Parliament in May of 2011. Getting elected to Parliament, I had a meeting with Jack Layton where we sat down and he said, tell me about, you know, who you are and what you're about. And we coincidentally went to the same high school. We grew up in the same hometown. So he asked me, so what clubs were you part of in high school? What things? And I said, well, Jack, to tell you the truth, I was a shit disturber. I wasn't a good high school student. I wasn't good in that town. I kind of, you know, gravitated to becoming an anarchist. And he said, oh, have you ever read Bookchin? And that went back to my college experience where I'd read that passage that I shared with you. And so getting into elected office as the first, I believe, the first elected landscape architect in the House of Commons in Canada, I was put on the Transport Committee, Transport Infrastructure and Communities. And I started to see that that my view that I had as a landscape architect and the idea of how I was going to make change would have to be compromised somewhat in order to work with people that have vastly different paradigms of thinking. I do remember one very important teaching that I got from UBC from Will Marsh, who taught the environmental course. He taught us basically how to argue with engineers. And I found that very effective in arguing with conservatives that were often talking about the bottom line and the economy of things. And you really can't argue against the green economy. When you look at gray infrastructure versus green infrastructure, the life cycle cost of green infrastructure is always cheaper. The main sticking point as a mayor would be maintenance. And I think that's often overseen by landscape architects. From my experience of the past 4 years as the mayor of Hudson, I oversaw many, many projects, infrastructure projects, buildings, and often for the public portion, for public infrastructure, maintenance is always an issue. So we just redid the village center, which had been neglected for about 20 years. And we brought on a landscape architect team that designed green strips that in my mind, it was perfect. the drainage would happen in the green strips. It would be less load on the stormwater sewer infrastructure. And yet the public, there was a great public outcry that the road wasn't going to be big enough. There was outcry that the maintenance of these things in winter climate would be a nightmare, all sorts of problems. And one of the things that I've learned from my career in politics is just and I learned in UBC as well, when, you know, explaining projects to different professors and your peers, is that you have to negotiate meaning and you have to compromise with others in order to get them on board. For many, many years, I thought that I could go it alone, that I could be the lone hero in this, and that I could revolutionize things to get to that better world. But you really need to do it with other people. And I also learned that at UBC in my research with Susan. We worked with many other departments. And one of the presentations that we found was getting out of this expert speak. So as a landscape architect, or as a politician, a policymaker, or whatever field you're from, you learn this expert language that when you're actually practicing with people of different paradigms, you actually have to train yourself out of using that language so that you can reach people with a language that they understand. And I think the past 10 years in politics has shown me that often I have to reflect how I communicate to others so that we can get to that place where we can solve this climate crisis that faces us. And so I would say that the skills that I got from UBC, teamwork, working with other professionals, not getting caught up in the expert speak, being exposed to a range of scales of projects, working with people from different disciplines, all those things helped me in my political career, helped me not get caught in a silo and not get caught in ideology, which often separates us in the world of politics. Once you get into elected office, it can become quite divisive, and you need to find those common points. And I just have to say that I think that my experience at UBC was really helpful in helping me in my political career. And just to share one last anecdote, right away I was put on that file of transport infrastructure and communities. And the big thing at the time was that the Champlain Bridge in Montreal needed replacing because it was crumbling. And I remember going to the bridge and talking with media crews about how it was crumbling and what was happening and the technical aspect of it, and really getting into it and going, wow, this is really going to be useful. And the crew said, well, given that the Conservatives haven't, dedicated anything in their platform to rebuilding this bridge, and that you've said it's, billions of dollars in commercial traffic over this every year, how does this make you feel? And I said, it feels like a slap in the face. And they had filmed so much of me talking about the technical things. And I thought, okay, this is real. I'm educating the people. And the clip that they put was, it feels like a slap in the face and nothing else. And I learned at that time to be very judicious with your words, especially when you go out as a landscape architect and you're presenting your project. Always think of the language that you're using, and perhaps we'll be able to communicate enough that we'll be able to solve this climate crisis together. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and all three of you. That was really so interesting to see all of your stories taking shape and continuing to do so. Emilia, are you ready to take over our Q&A?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have any answer or questions from the,
Not yet,
the group yet, so I'm just gonna ask my own questions, which is always fun because I get to kind of
First dibs, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, such really interesting stories and lives so far. I really know where to start. But I mean, we were just talking so much about politics, and Michael, you said that architecture is a political act, which I think was so interesting. And I guess I'm wondering if you found that you were taught in school to kind of navigate the politics of architecture, or if you find that there's anything kind of either like in your experience or the way that you see kind of architectural education now that could teach us to better navigate that kind of political world.
Well, I don't know if there's anything specifically that I learned, but I think that I know that there are some people who say, oh, I'm just a designer, I'm just an artist, you know, politics, I don't want to dirty myself with politics. Well, the reality is if you're going to build something in the environment, it's a political act. You are going to impact people, and you have to recognize that it's a political act. And so, so you got to work with it. You know, it's not like politics is a bad thing. It's and so I think it is something that that certainly, you know, the kinds of work I was doing, at least as an architect and later as a developer, is big complex projects which require all kinds of entitlements and approvals. You have to roll up your sleeves, you have to listen to people and understand where they're coming from, and then try and educate them. I'm kind of what Jamie was talking about. I mean, it's the ability to communicate is really clear. I don't do it very often, but because I'm not all that good at it, but I occasionally get brought in for crits at school. And one of the things that I always say is that in the theater world, I used to do a lot of theaters. In the theater world, they talk about people being a triple threat if they can dance, sing, and act. In architecture, I think the triple act is if you can write, you can speak, and you can draw. And I always tell people, you can do 2 of those 3 things, you're going to be fine. If you can do 3 of those 3 things, you're going to have a great career. And I think, you know, focusing on that, I mean, obviously you got to learn how to design, do all that stuff, but those skills, those communication skills are absolutely incredibly valuable.
Yeah, thank you. No, and I absolutely agree. And sometimes I feel like that is especially the writing one, I feel like sometimes gets left behind a little bit. So maybe that's something that we could.
I mean, the sad thing is that people aren't very good designers, but who are really good communicators often have very successful careers. That's the flip side of it.
Yeah. Similar to that, so you were kind of talking a lot about having to both move through like different scales through your work, and also having to collaborate with different sort of trades and fountains of knowledge, essentially. Did you find that kind of like your architectural background like was helpful in that, or was that something more that you've kind of learned on the go?
It's a good question. I think what was super valuable from the trauma of grad school was figuring out how to multitask and how to keep a lot of balls up in the air at any given moment in time. And so I think that can be applied to basically any real world scenario. So at the museum, where I'm working with lots of different internal and external stakeholders, everyone, as you might imagine, has an opinion. So you need to make sure that everyone is feeling heard. And of course, almost all of the opinions are valid. And you have to then understand strategically how to appease as many people as possible and how to get buy-in on these projects in order for them to move forward to the next phase over time. So I think that it was a combination of dipping my toes in that in grad school, and I guess also in undergrad. It's a shout out to UBC, and then finessing that in the real world over time. I think being a diplomat in my line of work is super important. Everyone should feel like they're your number one, even though that's not humanly possible.
I like that. I like the diplomat kind of idea. Jamie, I had a question for you, because you were talking a lot about like wanting to be kind of like the voice that advocates for these issues, all the issues that you were saying. Do you feel like you found kind of the best career at this point for being that voice?
Well, I found being mayor, it was my first executive leadership position. Really, my time at in the House of Commons was in a supporting role. But as mayor, as in an executive leadership position, I did find that there was quite a lot that could be done. It just seemed that the state of the town was really broken for various reasons. And often I was putting out fires, which happens as a politician, but we managed to make progress and see progress. So yeah, I do think that an elected position, if you look out of the box of your own personal ego and you look at what's really necessary for your community, that there's a lot that can be done. We planted 750 trees in 2020. And just like those kinds of projects, you can make them happen like that. What I found as a landscape architect that was frustrating was that it wasn't us that was controlling the purse strings. It was always the elected officials. And so when you actually get in charge of the budgets, you can actually use them for a lot of good. The thing that was frustrating as a mayor was seeing a lot of bad projects that were coming and that our bylaws didn't really protect against. So as a landscape architect, that was super frustrating because as an elected official, you're not allowed designing the buildings. And I had an architect on council, and she had the same frustration. And now she actually is the one that became the mayor. So so now she's sitting in the seat that I was and going through the same things that I went through. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. It does. Thank you.
In politics, you often get accused of, going tangentially and not actually answering the question. So I always have to check now.
No, yeah, no, that was definitely it. I guess I personally have kind of a question for all of you, because when I was kind of picking careers, I kind of went through a switch because I did my undergrad in politics essentially, and then I switched to architecture. So I'm wondering, kind of the emotional side of going through a switch, was that something that went through your mind, and was it kind of a scary thing to do, or was it more of a natural progression and maybe something that you had been seeking out the whole time?
I guess I'll take that one first. I think the first time, like I described when I got elected to the House of Commons, I wasn't really expecting to end up elected. Basically, running as an NDP politician in Quebec was not really, it was a high risk thing. But I would say that when I ran for mayor, it was very conscious, and I did know that that I had good chances of getting into that. At the same time, there's always that emotional side of you don't have the predictability in elected office to know how long you're going to be there. So so you put your hat in the ring, you get elected, but you don't know if you're going to get reelected. And I watched a lot of colleagues get into sort of the emotional fear of that, going oh my God, I'm not going to get reelected. And their actions reflect that fear. And then they don't make the right decisions. They're just trying to please certain groups. And at the end, there's still no guarantee that you're going to get reelected. So my approach was always okay, I have to get rid of that fear and just do what I think is right for my community.
I would say, to answer your question, for me, it was more of a natural trajectory. I was always interested in exhibition design, but had zero idea that there was a world in which I could work for a museum and specialize in that. And I tried to work at a straight ahead firm, and it was clearly not the right fit for me. And so I felt like I dipped my toe in it, and then I had this other interest that I was really passionate about. And then over time, through lots of networking, it worked out. but it wasn't exactly such a calculated path, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective too, there's a fair bit of serendipity in almost everybody's career, I think. But for me, it was the SCDC role was a wonderful chance to really broaden my influence, which is what I think every architect really wants to have. And it was fantastic. And a lot of people said, "Oh, you know, it didn't work out in the end." And I must admit, I don't regret these last few years. It was more exciting than the previous years, and I think that's the other thing is, you know, I'd had a really exciting architectural career and we'd accomplished a lot. And I was sort of in my 50s and I was thinking, God, do I want to be doing this? It's exciting, but do I really want to be doing this for the rest of my life? And I think there comes a point where it's important to take risks and try new things. And I must admit, it really paid off for me even. It was really, really exciting to do that. So I would encourage people to consider opportunities when they do come your way.
That's great, thank you. We have a question in the chat. Leslie says, you have all had careers with major switches. Looking forward, Zoe, I'm curious, do you think about leaving the museum world, or is that home now? Michael, I wonder if you can imagine doing something not related to development. And Jamie, what's your next move?
I have thought about leaving the museum world, but it's a pretty nice place to work overall. In addition to the fact that there seem to be endless gallery renovation projects on the docket for the next decades, although I don't know if I can tough it out for that long. There are a lot of benefits to working at a museum. Mainly the benefits are really good. The time off is really good. The healthcare, which is super important in the US, is really good. So I think I would like to keep moving around in this world for a while. I don't think I am a lifer at this specific museum, but I think I have at least a handful of additional years at the Met. And then I'm not sure what's next.
I guess for me, I'm actually having a great time. It's sort of, it's like being at the smorgasbord. I'm trying a lot of different things and we'll see what catches. I think in the end, they all have some tangential, at least, relationship to having an influence on the built environment, whether that's, you know, helping other people, facilitating their projects, or working with nonprofits to try and help them kind of accomplish their goals. But it's I don't think I'll be too far away from that. I'm not going to pivot beyond that, but it's you know, that's one of the great things is you develop some skills which turn out to be quite useful for people. So I'm enjoying just trying things out. We'll see if anything sticks more than else, but I don't know yet. Still figuring it out.
For me, the next step, I've put out feelers to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They have a policy advisor position that's open, that it's actually, I would be working with a lot of people that I worked with in Parliament if that comes to fruition. And the second thing that I've been working on for a while is I've been working on a few books. So I would like to publish something within the next year, or at least get that in process. So those are two things that right now, the defeat is very fresh. The election was on November 7th. And so still processing, but definitely those two things are possibilities, but I'll definitely keep all of you updated on where I end up.
So we have one last question, building off of that last Leslie's comment. Would any of you consider returning to practice architecture? Why or why not?
I actually still practice in the evenings. We do some renovation work. My husband and I, so we've renovated a couple of spots upstate and have them on Airbnb. We renovated the brownstone we're living in, and I'm sure we'll do some other side projects. I don't think I would necessarily want to work for someone else practicing architecture, but it's helpful to have my license for that reason so I can do these side projects.
Well, I've kept my license, but I'm not sure I want to. I don't think I want to go back to practicing certainly the way I was before. So I think it would have to be a new way of doing it, and I haven't figured out what that is yet. So.
I did not keep my license, and returning to an office where I would be like, I practiced for a very short time because I graduated in 2007, and working on AutoCAD, that was primarily what I did, and that's kind of a nightmare to me. I kind of never want to return to that again. Part of the thing that I loved about landscape architecture and what drew me to it was site visits and site inventory, site analysis, things like that. So in that sense, in terms of the analytic sense and things, I wouldn't have a problem returning as a consultant. But on the bottom of the totem pole where I was when I was practicing, I would never want to go there again. But I do think that that it's a necessary passage for any designer to actually go through those steps, and it was valuable. It was a valuable time. It's just I wouldn't want to go back to it.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, thank you all so much. I think we're just hitting time, and I don't think we have any more questions, so that's great. But yeah, I think I speak for all the students that like we really value your time, and it's really great to hear all your experiences and kind of having an idea of what could be out there for us if we don't follow that really traditional path. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's so great to see all the different paths. And I also just want to thank Emma Fennell. She's always in the back kind of working the magic and making sure things go smoothly. So thank you, Emma. And also to the entire outreach committee for helping coordinate and organize and bringing all this together. So that includes Emilia, of course, also Leslie Van Duzer, who's the head of our outreach committee, Daniel Rohr, Selena Chow, and Ronak. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, have a good evening. Okay, bye.